Okay, so poverty and economic justice. So first we're gonna do a little bit about the background. So a just society ensures basic needs are being met, invests in social well-being, especially for those who are unable to provide for themselves. Social work has advocated and fought to protect the vulnerable and oppressed for social just income and employment policies. Moving forward, the social work profession is promoting critical economic policy priorities as an essential for those in need. So these could be building a universal support system, financial security, and adequate safety nets. Economic systems, institutions, and practices influence how well people fulfill their needs, achieve ideal developments, and how often natural needs are fulfilled. So when these needs are not being fulfilled, it can cause physical, emotional, and social problems. So a little bit of the background is in 2006, the Census Bureau estimated that 36.5 million Americans lived in poverty, and over 15.4 million of that population lived in severe poverty, and with over 5.5 million children under the age of 18 living in severe poverty. It's a tale of skewed wealth and income that generates huge riches for little, but creates low wages, rising debt, and risk for deep and persistent poverty for most. So wealth in the United States is defined by the net worth, which is the value of assets minus debts, and is the focus at the very top of the economic ladder. So 15,000 families control 5% of the nation's income. US workers are a dividing, shrinking share of the economic pie, affecting weekly earnings of the US private sector, non-farm, and non-supervisory workers. A large part of the US workforce work at poverty level wages. So some residual problems include the US Census Bureau determines income thresholds for establishing who's in poverty, which varies by number of adults or children in the family. In 1964, a formula was developed by Molly Orshansky for calculating poverty, and this did not include geographic location, living expenses, or non-cash benefits. So to calculate who is poor in the United States, the Census Bureau compares a family's annual before taxes, so their family annual income to their poverty threshold, and if they fall under the threshold, then they are considered poor. In 2006, the weighted average of poverty threshold for 4 people was about 20,000, for 3 people was about 16,000, 2 people were 13,000, and 1 person was 10,000. In 1996, following the passage of the welfare reform caseloads, they plunged by about half. So many parents left welfare and found low wage jobs, and their annual wages left them at poverty level income. So researchers have found elements of welfare reform programs that are successful in moving families to work, but still many families were needing some levels of support. So now we are going to move into some issue statements. So social workers see firsthand the traumatic cost and consequences of poverty and employment in their work with individuals and communities every day. So lack of jobs and economic insecurity play a part in the amount of mental illness, family violence, suicide, substance abuse, crime, and low volume for healthy families and community functions. Economic security also compromises effective planning of traditional social work services. So for example, these could include individuals and family therapy, group work, vocational counseling, or community organizations. The knowledge and experience of social workers to advocate for income, employment, and social support policies to promote economic justice and social well-being for all members of society. Okay, so a couple of the issue statements included wealth and debt. So there are vast differences between economic status of Black and white families when examining their respective median and average financial wealth. So there's data on median wealth shows that the disparities were extreme, and the data on average wealth have no less extreme. So in 2004, median wealth of Black families was about 300, And for white families, it was more than 3,600,000. On average, Black families had 6,100,000 and white families had 400 and 200,000. So to make ends meet, Americans have taken on large amounts of debt and not have enough money for life's basics. So deregulation of credit card interest, credit card fees, and aggressive marketing tactics have exposed low and middle income consumers to predatory lending practices. So this could eventually jeopardize economic futures and increasingly lead to bankruptcies. A couple other issue statements was counting the poor and concentrated poverty. So poverty reaches greatly across the US and greatly concentrated among the young. So children under 18 represent about 24.9% of the total population, but account for 35.2% living in poverty. So poverty among America's 100 million people and ethnic minority groups is widespread and skewed in ratio to the representation in the population. So geographic isolation and concentration of urban poor populations are key determinants of complexity and persistence of poverty in the US. So Hurricane Katrina exposed the geographic concentration in what Wilson called the new urban poverty. So some other issue statements include welfare reform and employment measures. So combination of wages, tax credits, cash assistance, and other benefits such as food stamps, Medicaid, childcare subsidies, and transportation to work for families led to a maintainable success in the effects of welfare reform. But still some families face barriers of stable employment due to lack of skills, education, disabilities, and physical or emotional conditions, and still need a higher level of support. Employment and unemployment measures should be carefully analyzed to obtain a clear understanding of what is being measured. So in 2007, the Labor Department reported that 7.2 million people were unemployed and an additional 1.3 million people were marginally attached to the labor force. So that is without jobs, but still interested in working. So another measure used by the Labor Department is a subgroup of marginally attached workers known as discouraged workers. So those who want a job but are without hope of finding work. And these guys accounted for 276,000 of the 1.3 million people reported as marginally attached to the labor force. The highest rate of unemployment reported by the Labor Department in September of 2007 was 17% for teens. This number did exclude discouraged workers and marginally attached workers. Now we're going to move into some policy statements. So the economic policy that includes the elimination of poverty and race-based barriers to opportunities, broad social, economic, and political actions to end poverty, the full use and development of available productive and creative human resources and capacities, efforts to educate social workers and the public about unequal distribution of income and wealth, and efforts to engage the public in understanding it's in everyone's interest to reduce economic inequalities. Some more policy statements include proposals to protect long-term possibilities of economic security programs, proposals to improve economic programs for low-wage workers, women, children, people of color, living in poverty, and disabilities, federal tax budget and spending mechanisms that help to narrow gaps in resources available to people at different levels, economic policies that either avoid recession and inflation or mitigate impact, and policy of full employment at all levels for all those able to work. More policy statements include income levels that meet or exceed federal poverty guidelines for anyone who works full-time, the federal minimum wage marked to cost of living increases and is a living wage, fair labor practices for all workers, including children, youth, and those on public employment programs, The national policy that creates a high quality support system for intergenerational well-being, including stable and practical economic and employment policies and care services for department family members. Then policies that support compensation for individuals involved in the care of dependent family members. And then our last set of policy statements include quality, accessible, and affordable childcare for those working outside the home, unstigmatized financial support at a level that enables those who are unable to work live respectably, federal programs that invest in education and retaining for low-income displaced workers, current public assistant recipients, and former public assistant recipients. Equitable community development and strengthening of communities through job creations, affordable and accessible quality housing and transportation, quality public education, high quality and affordable healthcare, and accessible opportunities for training and employment, which can lead to better jobs at living wages. So expanded efforts by the United States at international economic cooperation and development of a comprehensive international industrial policy. So the conclusion is poverty and economic inequality are critical human rights problems in the US. For many citizens living in poverty, certain human rights are out of reach. So they may lack access to safe work conditions, housing, education, health services, or just basic needs. So different policy choices can bring different outcomes. When government invests in jobs and these policies to increase workers' wages and families' economic security, children and families see better outcomes in both long and short term. So it is possible for America to dramatically cut poverty. It just needs to build the political determination to enact these policies that will increase economic security, expand opportunities, and grow the middle class. Thank you.